I am super happy to be here and especially happy to be sharing space with you, Shannon. For those of you in the participants who don't know this, Shannon and I met a few years ago on our healing journey. And it's just such a gift to be here working together, supporting other people.
Absolutely. It really is such an honor because you and I met when we were both recovering from chronic pain and kind of in this state of hoping that we could and curious and practicing, and we did it together. And it's so interesting that a couple of years later we both get to do this work now and actually help and share that it is possible in all different aspects. So yeah, I'm so excited to be having this space with you and to be diving into a topic that, is really, it comes up a lot around, just life in general. Grief is a part of being human, but also in regards to chronic pain too. And you have so much insight and wisdom to share. So I'm really excited to hear from you.
Thank you. And before we get started, I wanted to share with our audience a couple of things to expect throughout this hour that we'll be sharing together. I will be guiding some practices throughout the webinar. And it's important for me to just come back to the practice over and over again, because for me, that has been the way out, not necessarily thinking, but actually engaging in the practices. And so we want to invite everybody with us here today to really participate in this experiential exploration and also share what's coming up for you on the chat. And if for any reason you're unable to follow the practices right now, whether you're driving or anything else is getting in the way of you engaging in the practice actively, feel free to come back to the recording on the website with Lynn or our Lynn YouTube channel so that you can engage in the practices later on. And also, if you love the practices and you want to repeat them, you can come back to them whenever you want. And I wanted to share a little bit about the pace to expect. If you're like me and some personality traits and you like to learn all the things all at once super quickly, I really relate. And at the same time, I think it's really important to honor a pace at which we can actually be with the experience and integrate. So slow and steady. Patience is something I have to keep practicing every day. And that's precisely the reason why I deliberately practicing slow and steady. And we know that when we engage with a high sense of urgency or intensity, that doesn't particularly support calming our nervous system and sending messages of safety. So we want to create an experience of as much safety as possible. So know that we won't get to everything about grief today. There will be a part 2 and possibly a part 3, so stay tuned. And throughout the webinar, I'll be referencing the work of different authors and attribution matters. So you'll be getting a list of resources, quotes, references, etc., as well as a copy of the poem that I'll be sharing. And that will be available on the website once the recording is posted. So no need to take notes or anything. Unless you have like a wonderful insight pertaining to your personal experience, your embodied experience, feel free to write away, but every reference will be shared with you. Right, so anything else before we begin, Shannon?
I'm really looking forward to diving in. I would just say, be gentle with yourself today. If something comes up for you while you're listening or hearing or from others, and just allow it to move through. It's not something that has to be so heavy. And I think that's one of the things we'll get to talk about today.
Yes, thank you for that reminder. Definitely be gentle with yourselves and take care of yourselves. All right, so we're going to start with a practice. So start by finding a position that doesn't require too much of an effort and in which you have access to all of the sensations in your body. And feel free to sit, stand, recline, lie down, whatever works best for you. And you can close your eyes or leave them open, whatever feels most comfortable. And you might want to begin by joining me in taking a couple of breaths, deep, if that feels good to you. And then gently allow your breath to find its natural rhythm. And throughout this practice, we'll be centering in dignity, in safety, in belonging, in presence. And we're going to start by centering in length. So moving down your body, possibly pushing your feet into the ground if you're sitting or standing, or just lengthening if you are lying down or reclining. Feeling your weight settle, supported by the ground. And then moving up through your spine, trying to make a little bit more space. Maybe strengthening, lengthening your spine, lengthening your neck, if that makes sense to you. And here we're centering in dignity. And the question we can ask is, what becomes possible from this place of dignity? And next, we're going to move to centering in width. So see if you can widen just a little bit in whatever way you can. That can be unfurling your shoulders, or feeling how the in-breath expands the spaces between your ribs on the sides. Feeling the outside of your knees, just taking up a little bit more space, either emotionally or physically. And noticing what it feels like to take up just a little bit more space. And now, if it feels right to you, I invite you to imagine a friend ally to your right, maybe touching shoulders with you. And another friend ally to your left, also maybe touching shoulders with you. And this might be a specific person, or it could be just a presence. As if you're standing in a circle. Or maybe you want to connect to the fact that there's a group of us here practicing together. And what we're doing here is centering and belonging. Just noticing what it feels like to belong in this moment. And a question we might ask here is, what becomes possible from this place of belonging? Now we are going to center in depth. So I invite you to feel your back body, maybe feeling the chair that your back is up against, or the cushion, the floor, the wall, or the space behind you if you're not leaning against anything. And this is also a place where we notice who has our backs and who came before us. So we recognize our elders, our teachers, our ancestors. Just notice if there's anybody who comes to mind when you think about who has your back, who's here to help protect you. And it can be a human or non-human being or energy, or it can be your wise self. And as we take our next breath, we move through our body to the front of our body. And then in front of us, in the recognition of future generations. And that can be part of the reason why some of us are doing this work. And by centering in depth and recognizing who has our backs and who's in front of us, we're centering in safety. And a question we might ask here is, what is possible from this place of safety? Now we're going to bring our focus to our center. And this can be around our belly for some of us, or around our heart for some of us. Wherever feels more centered to you. And just take a couple of breaths here from a place of center. Noticing if there's any other part of your body that needs attention for a moment. And sending your breath to that part. And I invite you to stay with your breath and notice what arises in your experience as I share the following poem. Be taught now, among the trees and the rocks, how the discarded is woven into shelter. Learn the way things hidden and unspoken slowly proclaim their voice in the world. Find that far inward symmetry to all outward appearances. Apprentice yourself to yourself. Begin to welcome back all you sent away. In inundation, make yourself a door through which to be hospitable, even to the stranger in you. Make yourself a door through which to be hospitable, even to the stranger in you. And see if you can stay present with whatever arises in your experience. And then as it feels right, in your next couple of breaths, expanding your awareness to include the room around you. And you can even look to the sides and to the back in recognition of the space around you. And now coming back to your screen. Thank you all for practicing with me. And I'm really curious about what all of you noticed arising in your experience with this practice. So feel free to share in the chat. And maybe you'd like to also share something of what came up for you, Shannon, if that's okay.
Absolutely. I found it very soothing and calming. It was a little, I know it sometimes can feel harder to kind of ground and calm your nervous system down. And for today, I just really needed that, and it felt really lovely. I liked the idea of the front and the back and the sides and taking up more space and allowing ourselves to just be here and relate to the body in a different way than we're probably used to. So it was a really nice guided practice. Thank you. And I also loved the poem that you chose.
Oh, thank you,
so
Shannon.
Special. I loved the part about bringing things back that we had pushed away. That one, that was particularly meaningful for me.
Thank you for sharing that. So I'm going to take a moment to look at the chat and see if there's anything being shared with folks. And for those of you who might be shy sharing, know that your sharing will be anonymous. Your name and information will not appear either right now or in the recording. So as we move along, if there's anything you'd like to share, please, you're welcome to, as far as feels right for each of you. All right, so not seeing anything in the chat, but if people feel called to share as we go along, please do. And we'll keep coming back to it. Right. So we're here to talk about grief. And I'd like to take a moment to share some thoughts about why it's relevant and how it shows up when we're experiencing pain and when we're healing from pain. And I'd love for you, to those who feel called to do it, to share a thread of grief that's present for you and that you can link to your pain or to your healing journey. And you can just drop it in the chat. And while we wait for folks to chime in, Shannon, I'm really curious about your experience as a coach here at Lynn and supporting people along their recovery journey and what comes up in the work that you do around, pain and healing related grief?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really interesting thing. Like I mentioned in the beginning, it's such a normal part of the human experience. But oftentimes we don't have a way to process it. And sometimes what we notice, sometimes pain comes on around grief. It's very typical. It's not all the time that happens, but a lot of times people can connect, like when their pain started was when there was a loss of some sort. And then it's a very interesting phenomenon as well, is that when we do start to recover and start to heal and feel better, there's often an aspect of grief that comes up on the years that we didn't feel this way. And that can also have some heavier emotions with it. And they don't need to be so heavy, they can be lighter, and it just depends on how we relate to them. But it's a very normal part of healing, and it, like I said, it doesn't need to be really difficult and heavy, but just knowing that it's normal and that you can honor those emotions and let them pass and move through is a really lovely thing. And there's lots of beautiful practices to help with that too, like self-compassion and other things.
Thank you, Shannon. And we'll be really looking into that in like a deeper exploration. And I'm seeing some people chime in on the chat, so I'm going to share. I found the safety piece really comforting, having support of our teachers and ancestors behind and in front future generations. Then somebody shared a thread of grief, death of mother. Thank you for sharing. I agree. I never emotionally feel grief. I just feel it in my body. Thank you for sharing. The meditation was very calming, so needed on this journey. I'm glad that was your experience. During the relaxation awareness, I felt fear, pain, and sadness in my center and just allowed it to pass. I told it that it was not dangerous. That sounds lovely. And I'm really curious about what effect that has to just let it flow through us, like letting emotions flow through us. Somebody else shared grief, who I was before my accident. Yes. Also, a part of my grief has been around losing a part of my very active lifestyle and the loss of my mother almost 3 years ago, and having my father end up in a nursing home, not what I wanted or pictured for my parents. Thank you for sharing all of these. And yes, definitely, grief is such a part of our everyday human experience, though we sometimes tend to think about it as just the major and very visible losses that can really radically change our lives. It also includes any and all experiences of loss that elicit sorrow in our bodies, in our hearts. And I'm going to share some examples of how fear shows up for me and how grief shows up for me in association with that fear, and also how it shows up in terms of identity and around the work that I do supporting others. So some people find that their pain or symptoms, like you said, Shannon, start at a time just immediately following an important loss or an experience of grief. Others find that it comes around an anniversary. And of course, we know that any strong loss can bring about not only grief and sorrow, but also fear and a sense of threat. And it can really affect the regulation of our nervous system. And it can show up in our bodies as pain, fatigue, insomnia, any other kinds of symptoms. And when this happens, I find it useful to really bring to mind that this is a piece of evidence that supports us in finding out that our symptoms have a strong primary component. So meaning that our bodies are speaking language that has to do with emotions and connection and relationships, and that people can benefit through an approach like Lynn's to help them find ways to relate to this experience differently, to calm the nervous system, and to address experiences of pain and symptoms that arise after a grief or a great loss. I've also found that in the context of having an experience of persistent pain and other symptoms, like somebody just shared in the chat, a sense of who I was before this is lost. And we can also lose relationships, professional opportunities, personal projects. Some people grieve for the partner they can no longer be to their spouse, or the parent they can no longer be to their kids because of this experience of pain and other symptoms. And here's another element to this for some people who can link their experience of pain to previous experiences of adversity or trauma. There can be grief and anger at the fact that, wow, I have to devote so much of my time and energy and resources to heal from a thing that happened because of something outside of my control. And it can be hard to connect to a sense of compassion or forgiveness or letting go. And that's part of the work that we do. And then there are also surprising ways in which grief shows up. And you shared one, Shannon, like, oh, wow, I'm recovering. This is a wonderful thing. And this sorrow is coming up at everything I lost all those years when I was in pain or deep in my symptoms. And I find that this is a really interesting place to explore. And I'll share that it was that way for me, and that when I found this neuroplastic pain approach, or this primary pain approach, there was almost a resistance to believe that this could be true. Because then what about all this time and energy invested in other ways from a belief that it was something structural going on in my body? And then if I believe this is true, then that means all that time I was given the wrong narrative, the wrong explanation, and I lost so much to this. And I see people are sharing more things in the chat, so I'll go back to that for a moment. Both my parents,
interesting thing. I was just going to mention, like, it's such an interesting phenomenon to have that grief, and I often find that it's also associated with some anger in that recovery, and there's some blame, and there's some whether it's self-inflicted or on others, and it's just such a strange but normal process. But go ahead and share what you're finding in the chat.
Yeah, thank you. Both my parents have now passed away, and I grieve the loss of both of them, but also the adjustment to no longer having family. Thank you for sharing. Someone is asking, can you say more about dignity? I've not seen that word used in this context before, and it has me intrigued. Oh, thank you for that question. For me, dignity has something connected to a sense of my own worthiness as a human being on this planet, and an inherent sense of worthiness, and the fact that I have gifts to offer, and I can center myself in this place of I can be grounded on the earth and exist on this planet. Because for a lot of us, grief is connected to experiences of shame, and we'll explore that in a moment. But as we tap into sorrow and shame, I find it useful to ground myself, like connected to this earth and standing from a place of dignity. I am worthy, I am deserving. And then so many possibilities open up. Someone shares, I have struggled with grief of the loss of my childhood because of medical negligence that caused chronic pain. So grief and also blame. Thank you for sharing. Grief, I have lost my best reproductive years to pain and symptoms. Thank you for sharing that. The loss of my mother was something I was, quote unquote, prepared for. I was advised by my therapist to address issues with my mother, as we did not have the best or even normal mother-daughter relationship, as having deep, serious conversations with my mother before it was too late, which would have left me with regrets. Thank you for sharing that. And another couple of ways in which grief showed up for me, which was also quite surprising if I'm honest. One was the grief of finding my pain gone. And that can sound super weird, but I found myself almost like missing my back pain or missing my anxiety. And I think that part of that had to do with this big empty space of who am I now? Who am I meant to be? Can I actually do this? Can this be true? How do I then engage with the world? What do I have to offer? And just, yeah, the sense of a void, which was intriguing and surprising and weird because I thought it would be pure bliss to find myself free from my symptoms. And that was not the case. It was just challenging and realizing I could now do so many things that I couldn't before. But many of those things included things that scared me, things I didn't like, things I felt clumsy at. And it was like almost losing this boundary that was just in place to use for everything that felt threatening or unpleasant. And now I didn't have that. And so I had to work at setting up new boundaries that made sense for me and served me at that time of my life with my pain gone. And there's also a component of grief at the realization that this process of healing and recovery wasn't a neat kind of thing. It wasn't linear. It wasn't smooth. It wasn't, one and done. It was messy and challenging and painful. And some days it felt like a full-time job. So I'm curious about what you found, Shannon, along these lines. And if anybody wants to share in the chat, you're also welcome.
Definitely. I think that one of the biggest surprises for me as I was recovering was that void that happened, because for so long, my goal was to not have pain and to feel better. Just wanted to feel like myself again, whatever that was. And I was in pain for a really long time. So I didn't even really know what that looked like because mine started in my teens. And so it was really interesting to discover that just not wanting pain wasn't enough, that I also could want and have other goals and dreams and relationships and hopes for my life besides getting out of pain and helping other people get out of pain too, which was a great and big goal. And I am, and you are as well, doing it. But I also found that I needed other things too. Relationships, connection, community, and challenges, like fun challenges, not just health challenges.
Not like finding the answer or the solution, but just like other kinds of life-related challenges.
Totally. I remember taking one of the first dance classes that I could, and just crying during class because I was overjoyed, but also feeling a little bit of grief because I was so happy I could move my body in that way. And also like I couldn't have done it the year before, and like really noticing how far that I had come. And there was a bit of grief in that too, and joy. So it's very interesting how it can be accompanied by different emotions too.
Yeah, absolutely. That was my experience too. And I remember the grief in rebuilding, or even building anew things that I hadn't been able to build. And there was grief intertwined with joy and gratitude and all of it together. And it felt like just having so many emotions at the tip of my fingers, even felt like. So yeah, there are a couple of questions which we'll be addressing in the Q&A section. And someone is sharing, I haven't laughed or had fun in so long. It's hard for me to find anything fun to do because of the pain I have. I feel like I need the joy back in my life. Yeah, and thank you for that comment. And I think for me, it's about making room for both. There's the pain and the grief and the sorrow. And in the presence of that, there can also be joy. Right. So as we can see, grief touches every single one of us. And I think for me, the question becomes, how do I learn to carry and tend to my grief and not collapse under it, and also not fall into denial? Because when an experience brings about grief and sorrow, I think that a lot of us default to the, oh, I don't want to feel that. This is very difficult. This is too heavy. So just like push it away or push it in and down and keep it in and even be silent about it. And when that happens, when we shift into denial, just feel crushed under the weight of something, it keeps us from seeing grief as something vital and necessary in our human experience. It's not just something to be endured. And how do we shift from this experience of maybe like a limited period of mourning to just this ongoing conversation that we can engage in throughout life, and engage in something that Francis Weller calls an apprenticeship with sorrow. So learning how we can be with our grief as opposed to having it be something to be fixed or pushed away. How can we be with the whole of our experience warmly and softly? And I think that there's a parallel here with the work we do with pain and other symptoms. It's more about learning to be with them in a different way, learning how to relate to them differently. And again, not something to fix or to get rid of. And I know that a lot of our participants are probably wondering, okay, great. So how do I do this? And one of the ways is practice. And we can practice to show up for ourselves differently and to be with our experiences of sorrow, disappointment, frustrations differently. And we can practice with the seemingly small things that we all face in everyday life. So starting with something as basic and maybe seemingly insignificant as not finding something I was really looking forward to at the store, or missing a phone call from a friend, or being unable to go on a longer walk than I would have liked to today. And so I can practice, I can take those moments as opportunities of, okay, here's a loss that may be not as big as other losses, but a loss nonetheless. And it brings up sorrow, frustration, or disappointment. And I can practice showing up for myself with kindness and compassion. And instead of berating me for, oh, just get over it, like this is so small and stupid, or like, never mind, or how can I be experiencing such an intense emotion when it's really not such a big deal? How about pausing here and saying, oh, wow, this is really disappointing. I am sorry this hurts. I know you're really looking forward to doing this. And then as we practice this skill and we are able to really train this skill, then we can show up for ourselves in a different ways for the things that may feel harder or bigger. Another way is to practice somatic tracking of the felt experience of an emotion in my body in response to an experience of grief. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with the practice of somatic tracking, this is one of the skills that our Lynn coaches are fantastically gifted at, and they can guide you through that. And we will experience and practice more ways of being with our experience differently in a moment. So I don't know if there's anything you'd like to add to this, Shannon.
I actually had a question come up, and I know a few of my members have had this question too. Sometimes when an emotion feels big or scary, or like there's a lot there, it's like, how do we take bite-sized like pieces of that without overwhelming ourselves? How, like, if someone was afraid to start to feel their grief, or to acknowledge a loss of a future, even that they had envisioned for themselves, or something along those lines, how would you encourage them or guide them in the process of becoming more accepting or feeling safe in experiencing the grief that they may know is there, but are afraid to tap into or unleash?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think of two possible practices, and we're going to do that. We're going to do one of them in a moment. The other one I'm going to describe because it depends on the person. But let's say, for instance, I have this huge emotion of sorrow and it's feeling really overwhelming in my throat and maybe in the back of my eyes and maybe in my stomach. So I can either choose to tap into one of those places And it might be the place where it feels the strongest, or it might be the place where it feels less threatening. So whichever choice is great. And it's often useful to find an anchor either within us or outside of us. So we can anchor ourselves in the breath if that feels neutral or positive and safe. Or we can anchor ourselves in a part of our body that is not in pain or discomfort. It could be even the tip of my fingers or the tip of my toes or any other part of my body. But it can also be an external anchor. So something to look at. There's this beautiful tree outside my window. I'm just going to notice that. And that's my anchor. And so I'm going to tune into these sensations of sorrow in my throat or my eyes or my belly. And then notice that and just track the sensations of it. And when it starts to feel like maybe too much, I can go to my anchor for a moment and then come back. And it's just like this dance of an exploration to become familiar with that. And if the thing is feeling like too big, I can notice, okay, so am I resisting this? Is there an edge of resistance or fighting to this? Well, yeah, I'm kind of feeling it like my shoulders are tensing up. All right, so maybe I don't need to focus on this huge sensations of an emotion of sorrow in my throat and my eyes or my belly, but maybe you can notice the resistance in my shoulders and soften into that with the breath. And then as I do this, I become more skilled in staying with my discomfort in a more gentle way and becoming familiar with the fact that as scary as it feels, it is actually not going to harm me. And I have the choice to go back and forth to different anchors, whether internal or external. And I don't know if this helps with your question.
Yeah, I love that. I use anchors as well. I just didn't know that that's what they were called.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, the fingers and then the tip of the nose, the tip of the fingers or toes. I know when I was doing a lot of work on the emotional aspect of this, I used a painting to kind of bring myself back. And I love that you're sharing these tools for people. So thank you.
Yeah. And the other one is a hand on heart practice. And let me
I love
see.
that one.
Yeah. So let me just look at the chat for a moment. It says, vulnerability is not something people are comfortable with. How do you allow yourself to be vulnerable bit by bit? I would say the same way you become more comfortable with anything, practice. Open up to moments, little moments of vulnerability. And the hand on heart practice is actually going to contribute to that conversation. And someone is thanking for spreading hope to so many who struggle with chronic pain. Thank you. And thank you for being here with us. And someone is sharing that, they've experienced really difficult experiences with psychiatrists and their actions towards them. And now it feels like it's safer to keep the emotions in. And some of the work that we do with grief has to do with allowing ourselves to break the silence and be witnessed. And for those of us for whom people feel too threatening, we can share and be witnessed by a rock or a tree or a river or a loving pet. And those are the spaces when we can start experiencing with, okay. And we can also do the centering practice we did at the beginning and centering ourselves in belonging with presences that feel safe, that may not be physical persons, and those who have our back, whether it be people who are still living or not anymore with us in the physical realm. And right, so I'll try to practice with a hand and heart thing right now. So bring to presence something that is difficult in your life right now, something that may be causing you grief or sorrow or disappointment or emotional pain of any kind. And notice how it feels in your body right now. And just breathe with this experience as best you can and as far as it feels right for you. And it can be, again, something seemingly small, like, oh, this friend I really wish would have called me yesterday didn't. And that feels rough. It can also be around your experience of pain right now. Oh, wow. I'm tired and I'm really sad. the fact that I'm experiencing this pain or this symptom. Or I feel shame around the fact that I am not the person I would like to be. Now bring one or both hands to your heart. And you can press gently and feel this gentle pressure, your hands on your heart. Or you can also choose to do it this way. Put one hand here, like between the heart and the armpit, kind of like wrapping it around. And let me shift my screen so that people can see me. So like here, again, gentle pressure. And then taking your other arm and wrap it around you. And hold your arm. Like you're giving yourself a hug. And breathe here. And notice what arises in your body. Maybe there's an impulse to rock, front to back, or maybe side to side, ever so gently. Or maybe just staying still. This feeling of your loving heart, hands on your heart, or wrapped around you. And as you breathe here, notice what arises in your experience. And you can offer yourself some soothing words, some comforting words, like, I'm sorry this is going on. No, sweetie, this is so hard. I'm here. This too will pass. Or maybe you just like to repeat, soften, soothe, allow. Notice what's happening with your breath. Is it deepening? Is it staying the same? Is it maybe a little bit more gentle? Does this feel challenging or easeful? And just notice with a sense of curiosity, what's happening here? And for those of you who have just done this practice, if you'd like to share in the chat what came up for you, that would be lovely to read. And also, Shannon, if you'd like to share what came up for you.
This is such a great practice, and it's something, like I don't look super weird just doing this on my own in public. It's something I like to give people that they can do anytime. Some people don't want to be able to do this, but I just find it really calms me down. I did find today that my mind was racing a little bit. It was hopping around to lots of different thoughts and things, and kept having to bring myself back to kind of calm and presence. But I also know that your mind doesn't have to settle while you're doing this practice. It's still helpful. So that's what came up for me today.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And for this reminder that it's not exactly about chasing a result, or actually not at all about chasing a result. It's more about allowing what's here to be here and taking that edge of resistance or fight energy out of it while we offer ourselves comfort. And physiologically, this gesture, like the gentle pressure over our heart, activates a relaxation response in our body. And that is just physiology, even in the presence of racing thoughts, even at the presence of difficult emotions, there's also that going on. And somebody shares, it makes me sleepy. That makes so much sense. Someone else shares, I felt a physical release. My shoulders dropped and my breathing became slower and steady. Someone else shares, it helped me feel calmer and feel like I am able to love myself as I am here and now. Thank you for sharing all of that. And I also want to name that for a lot of people, the first times practicing this, it will feel weird. Or it might feel like super vulnerable, like, oh, wow, I'm coming into touch with things that I'm not really used to being in touch with. And that can feel scary too, and that's okay. So feel free to continue to experiment with this as feel right to you. And you can stay there for even a couple of seconds, or then maybe a few minutes, and just, play with it a little bit and see what comes up.
Really, and practice being like a loving presence for yourself. Like, there's often a duality happening inside of you. Even if there's tons of pain, you may find one spot that isn't quite so much. Or if you're feeling really overwhelmed, you may find like one part of you that can be calm and loving for yourself, and you can stay present with that and practice growing it. It can be a really lovely thing to do for yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd like to offer one more practice before we go into the Q&A section. And this is a writing practice. So I'll describe it here briefly, and you'll all be getting a file with a full description of the practice and a long list of prompts. For now, I'm giving a couple of examples of prompts, or shuttles, as we call them, and describing the practice briefly. So the idea here is to set aside 10 minutes for your writing practice, and this is a specific grief writing practice. And the idea is to start with a prompt or shuttle, pen to paper or pencil to paper, without taking it up. So you just leave it on the paper and you start with a prompt. So I'll give one example right now. I'm grieving, ... I'm grieving. And then if nothing comes, I will just write, I'm grieving, I'm grieving, I'm grieving, I'm grieving. And as soon as something else comes, I will write it without censoring, without editing. Just write. And then once my 10 minutes are up, the invitation is to share this, for this to be witnessed, for your grief to be witnessed. And it can be with a loved one. It can be with a friend. It can be with a therapist, a bereavement doula, a pet, like I said earlier, a river, a rock, a tree, a beautiful plant. And then once we've done that, once we were witnessed by whatever being we've chosen to trust with our experience, and there's also an invitation to discernment here. Who will I share this with? Who is it safe to share this with at this time? And that might change in the future. And once we've done that, to connect to a loving kindness or a self-compassion practice, or music that really gets my body with the rhythm and dancing, or doing something that brings me either ease or joy, or even a neutral experience. But the idea is to allow for space for this to happen, but also make space for everything else that's here in life. And I'll give a couple of prompts here, and feel free to come back to them as you feel called to do this, even later today or in following days. And a couple of them are, I'm grieving. Don't ask. I remember. And again, these prompts you will get in the file to follow the webinar. And one last thought to share before we go to Q&A is that when we're talking about grief, I also find it important to consider that grief is a measure of our love. There's this beautiful quote that I love that says, grief is praise because it is a natural way that love honors what it misses. Grief is praised because it is a natural way that love honors what it misses.
So beautiful.
And someone sharing, what a gift today. You beautiful souls, exactly what I needed. I am so glad to hear that. Thank you for being here with us. And all right, so let's go to Q&A.
Sure. So the first question is, why does trauma affect someone not only mentally, but physically too?
That's a great question.
I would say also grief too, not just trauma, but I love this question.
Yes. So okay, let me see where I start. All right. Mm-hmm. So any event that involves a stimulus to our central nervous system, to our mind body, will elicit a response. And the response will be grounded in our physiology. And as human beings, as living creatures, we've evolved with this fantastic mechanism for ensuring survival. And this fantastic mechanism for ensuring survival has given us the gift of different responses to different circumstances. And the responses very generally are, when we're safe, we activate what we call the rest and digest state, and also activate the connect state. So, oh, it's safe to go and chat to somebody, to, stretch an arm to somebody, and to just engage in the joys of everyday life. Then there's a next level of threat, which means, oh, there's a danger, there's a threat present here. So how do I activate these mechanisms, this really wise mechanisms in my body, to make it possible for me to either fight or run away, flee from this thing that is threatening and that is going on? And our brain makes these decisions in split seconds without going through awareness necessarily. It's just like a split second decision of, am I safe? Am I under threat? And then there's a third response when our life is in danger. And this response has to do with activating the freeze response. So I'm paralyzed. I play dead to be safe from this threat to my life. And or I fawn. I submit and please, so that this thing or this person who I'm in danger from doesn't see me as a threat, and so doesn't attack me. And again, there's incredible wisdom in these three responses. And when something like a traumatic event happens, especially the earlier it happens in our lives, it can activate a really strong either fight or flight and or freeze or fawn mechanism. And then more often we're exposed to this same stimulus or the same situation or experience, the more familiar our nervous system becomes with this state. And it's really wise, if we're in a war zone, for instance, to be able to tap into that mechanism really quickly. So the stress response, the threat response. If we're generally safe, it's a great idea for us to be able to access more freely the rest and digest mechanism. And so when we're exposed to a traumatic event, this event brings about a certain response in our body. And then if we add a layer of, was there someone I could talk to about this? Was there someone to offer care or witnessing to me? Then that also will elicit or activate different responses in our bodies, in our central nervous system. And so that's my very brief explanation about why it affects our bodies too. And when our bodies are consistently engaged in these neural circuits of threat and alarm and danger, it is really easy to activate pain and other symptoms as attempts to protect. So they're in essence protection mechanisms.
For that beautiful explanation. I don't think that we have much time left. So I think we're going to have to wrap up on the questions. But if you all have any questions, please feel free to send them in. We also are offering a one-on-one coaching call. It's a free 15-minute call that you'll get to speak with one of our coaches, most likely me, if you are interested in learning more about the LIN program and perhaps how a mind-body approach may be able to help you with your own pain journey and recovery. So we are going to send a link in the chat now. You'll also get an email with that information as well. But it's a really great opportunity. Just if this, if any sort of aspect of the mind body or this sort of approach to chronic pain resonates with you and you're interested in learning more about what we do, I would be happy and our coaches would be happy to speak with you a little bit more about how that might work out. So if there are any other questions, please go ahead and send them in and we will get back to you. But otherwise, I will hand it back over to Lily and then to Alyssa or Hunter to close us out.
Yeah, thank you, Shannon. I just want to say that this framework of grief tending we just like dipped our toes in it today.
Mm.
And so I think we'll come back to it in future webinars. So stay tuned. And again, if you want to repeat the practices, if you want to come back to them as many times as feels good for you, the recording will be posted on the website and on the YouTube channel for Lynn. So come back as many times as you want. And we'd love to hear your experience with the practices and what we discussed today.